Hello everyone and welcome back to INN's continuing coverage of the Streamfleet Showdown Invitational 2. And today we're bringing you something that's never been seen before in tournament coverage, and that is a match breakdown as done by the captains that fought in the match themselves. This should serve to give some window into what actually playing in a tournament match is like, as well as also give a real lowdown and in detail kind of description of the meta and some of the decisions that were made during this match. We also didn't play it through in real time, we had a video that we could always stop and start at any given time, allowing us to focus in on certain points and really go into detail. Unfortunately, my own personal audio wasn't recorded because I am very bad at technology. However, as the majority of the conversation is just between the two captains, with me only coming in every now and again to add some more questions or change the subject, so I just cut out the pauses that would have been present from when I was speaking. But if you hear the captains change subject rapidly or answer a question that doesn't seem to have been asked, that's myself, whispering in their ears like the ghost of Christmas past. If you like this sort of content, please let us know in the comments below. And with that, I'll let the captains introduce themselves.
Hello everyone, I'm Katalya Mist. I am the captain for the Brave team, and I am here with Dirk from the Goons team.
Yep, I am the captain of House Goondor. Hi. We came up with our name kind of as a bit of a meme, so we'll call it there. That's all.
Yeah, pretty much the same for our team. When I was typing in Brave Newbies into the team name, I decided that was too boring, and so I changed it into Brave Nubbies, simply to entertain myself, and it kind of stuck. Everyone likes it now. Uh, so definitely a bit of a meme there as well. It is an awesome logo. We've also had Ewok memes just going off the walls in our tournament channel, so it's great.
I do like the Ewok, yeah.
So our ban on our side was we banned the Drake Navy, which you said might have been kind of a default day one. I know Brutus Navy got a lot of bans day one, but looking over the Goon comps from where I was sitting, I saw that the Drake Navy was probably the one, especially with the Stork boosts, which I tend to value those boosts pretty highly when it comes to the comp selection and bans. Um, Looking at that with its mobility, high EHP, basically, and then comparing it with my comps, I had to like mentally simulate, so to speak, because our practice was limited. I looked at that and said, this, of all of their comps, this is the one that we can't take. And we were kind of hoping that by picking their Drake Navy comp, we would see Goons take out their Dracovic comp, which we're assuming was maybe sort of your version of Bandbait. Um, but we had actually simulated in our very minimal practice time, we had taken and remade your Dracovic comp um, and tried to just run our other comps against it to see how they paired up. And our Brutix Navy versus your Dracovic comp in our practices, and of course we didn't know what your fittings were at the time, but we can make best guesses. That actually showed out to be a pretty good matchup, and so that was what we were hoping to see with this ban phase. Unfortunately, as you can tell, that was not the comp that you went with.
Yeah, so our Drekavac comp is actually one that I came up with myself, and we had a lot of conversation about the lower end on that. Whether or not we were going to go Drekavac, Vedmak, Kikimora, or if we were else in there. Obviously, we ended up bringing the Kikimora into the comp that we ended up bringing, which was at Caracal 4. But really, when it came to our ban idea, really didn't like the idea of the Rekovac as a like ramping DPS ship. We tended to want to stay away from that. And additionally, we didn't really like the Crucifier Sentinel on the low end here.
Yeah,
Obviously,
it's a
we only
scary
had
combo.
we only had one missile composition at all. That was the Drake Gila Caracal that we really set up, and so everything else was going to be turrets.
Yeah,
Really,
as
our yeah.
as far as this Dracovic comp goes on our side, this was intentionally what we would call ban bait. So we built this comp purely to make it as scary as we could, while intentionally pulling out ships making sure that we didn't put ships in there that we wanted elsewhere, because we figured it would pull the ban. So that was our hope, anyway, on our side. So you kind of played into our trap. Not that this worked out for us, but well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely appreciate that. Like we were working on the basis that our first match was always going to be a turret-based thing. We didn't want to see those tracking disruptors going off, which would really have hurt us. And so we decided the ban largely on the Drekavac Crucifier Sentinel without worrying about anything else.
That's fair. We were pretty confident. I will definitely admit. Looking at just the not even before Warpins, just looking at the comp matchup, the fact that we had links and they didn't gave us perhaps a false confidence at the time that we could punch through their heavy DPS faster than they could ours and turn the match that way.
Honestly, we were pretty happy with this warp-in because the screen doesn't necessarily show it, but we were actually at an angled warp-in. This wasn't a straight line warp-in. We were at an angle, which is how the beacons work. And so I'd actually basically whenever I see a comp that I'm coming up against, I kind of mentally go through and have a discussion with my guys as well about which ships I want to take out first. Like, which ships are we going to be able to A, murder pretty quickly, but B, will take a lot of their damage or utility off the grid. And as we go through the match, you'll see that the Navy Execra was actually the first thing that we managed to kill of Braves. But that was my initial thing. And as we saw the warp in, we had this Navy Brutix and Deimos in at 0. And we actually felt fairly confident at that point that they were actually kind of blaster fit and hoping to just rush us. So we were actually confident that we could move away from them and around towards our primary.
Oh, interesting. Um, just for everyone's reference, we were all rail fit every ship.
Yeah, this was a thing that we only found out after the fight, but as we were warping in, we were actually fairly confident about this.
I know at Warpins we kind of rapidly looked at each, well, at least your Navy Brutix. I remember I right click zoomed in on and inspected the guns just to see what you were fit with. They were still pretty high. So just to explain my thought process on why they were high, our actual practice time was, I think we had 2 real practices because we joined the tournament very late. And so in our practice, not being super familiar with the new format, we had basically, and to be fair, these are internal, so I'm shooting Braves quote unquote B team, I guess. Not really, but because our team selection was effectively random given the way we signed up. In any case, because of the fact that we had links, because the fact that it was rail versus rail, what the idea was basically that if we could remove their top end DPS quickly enough while keeping ours alive, that would allow us to rep through whatever else they have on field. And even if it had to go to tiebreaker because we're not tracking, hopefully survive. Because it didn't look like you had anything with a sizable amount of newts. We figured our self rep should have been able to handle that. It turns out that our Deimos was actually the wrong fit that we submitted. So that actually played against us pretty badly in this match coming up here.
The interesting thing for me was the warp in of those links. Those links are actually pretty far away from your Brutix Deimos core. Like that they're outside of optimal effective boost rate, if I remember rightly, to begin with. So they wouldn't, or maybe they're just within it actually.
They're just within it.
Just within, yeah.
Yeah, so they're just on the edge, and it's enough to catch.
Yeah, it's enough to catch for the first few seconds.
So on our end, we were immediately basically, as I had kind of discussed from our limited practice and what we thought we knew about the format here, we immediately went after the Brutix. You can see the paint go out on the Brutix. Shields drop pretty quickly. We had some DPS in the Kikimora as well, but that was from our smaller end. I think that was like our heretic
Yeah,
that was dealing with that.
I was actually the Kikimora pilot here, and our primary target absolutely was that Navy Execra. You can see Punisher here taking some damage. That was being screwed off, I believe, by our Caracal at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Basically,
Which, yes.
it was just
there are multiple small piloting mistakes in here that I was not incredibly happy with post match. That would be one of them.
yeah, the fact that our Caracal was actually rapid light fit meant that we could throw a ton of burst damage onto that tackle and try and make sure that it was taking some damage, forcing that pilot to think about what he was doing a bit more, and stopping that pilot from getting in on our zealot too effectively because he's got more things going on. Whereas our actual primary DPS, as you kind of start to see here, was the Navy Execra. And so yeah, the Navy Execra basically because it's railgun fit, but also it's not got huge amounts of tank compared to the Navy Brute. Deimos meant that they out one of the major
Yeah,
fight even
exactly.
got
But
going.
it's EHP to DPS matchup for the Navy Exec makes it a fantastic primary, and we basically understood that. It almost feels like we throw it away perhaps too easily. Um, and there were, I had some perhaps piloting concerns about how easy he was caught out, but given the fact that you guys were rail fit, there wasn't really much we could do to keep that ship alive.
Yeah, we also had a lot of small, fast ships, so I won't worry too much about it.
No. With the Caracal, the Kikimora, etc., the Zealot. I mean, was the Zealot beam fit? Probably.
The Zealot, I would have to go back and take a look at our fits, but I believe the Zealot may have been pulse fit.
Okay. I mean, that does make sense given the way the match ended.
The other thing I'd like to mention actually, our secondary primary after the Zekiro went down for our smaller ships, so the Kikimora and the Eris, was actually due to the Heretic, and we ended up switching it across to Deimos because everything was fairly close anyway, and the Deimos was starting to tank, which is why we switched at least the Kikimora over, and Eris just kind of went with that instead.
Yeah. I mean, you can see at this point in the match, the Deimos, which is what I was in, was already taking damage. I had a huge piloting mistake, which I have had to own up to for this match, in that I forgot to turn off auto reload on my Ansel, which meant that that hit reload a bit earlier because you can see I'm already pushing armor. Um, that hit reload much earlier than even I expected, unfortunately, because I wasn't paying enough attention. And that Deimos goes down pretty quickly, it looks like. At this point, I think as I see everyone switch to me, I'm hitting ADC, and then I don't last very long after that.
Yeah, so you'll see a couple of rep cycles come off here.
Uh, it's starting to feel much less certain at this point. I have not adjusted my game plan because that Navy Brutix does need to die. And I feel like, I mean, perhaps it's
You want to pause it, Jim?
the fallacy of, you know, the, what is that fallacy called? Where you've, put so much into something you don't want to let it go.
Yeah, sunk
Exactly.
cost.
Yeah, so it was perhaps a bit of sunk cost fallacy on my end because, like, perhaps it would have been a better idea to switch, but at that point it would have been such a major loss just not removing the Brutix from the field. My hope was that once we did finally get that Brutix down, without Brutix still at full health, it would act as sort of a turning point. Um, it did not work out that way, but that was
honestly, I don't believe that switching away from the brute or But carrying on with the Brutic, I don't believe it would have been a sunk cost fallacy at all, because obviously with the way the rules work in this tournament, the highest level ship still alive wins the match. So, like, if you still had your Navy Brute at the end and we didn't have ours, you'd win even if we'd killed the bottom 5 ships of your comp. And the other interesting thing as well, having talked to our Navy Brutix pilot, is that he thought he died a lot quicker than he did. He wasn't convinced at the end of that fight that he'd had much of an impact until it came to things like the Navy exec and the Deimos kill, where he actually managed to look at some of the damage that he did. So taking him off the grid actually did leave him feeling as if could have done better for a second. It was quite interesting to match afterwards as well and go, actually, no, you did really well, dude.
Yeah, he did well, and that's another reason that, you know, if we can get that off the field, it's a huge chunk of your DPS. So I do understand that you actually have a really nice set of DPS in the in the low end of your comp, which is basically what wins the match at the end. But the thought was that if we can remove the Navy Brutix and just keep our Navy Brutix alive, given that he was actually armor fit, so yours was hull, ours was armor, between the links and the repair of the Navy Brutix on our side, the hope is that we could basically just keep him alive, even if we didn't succeed in killing some of your lower end.
Yeah, it's a really solid concept to go in with, absolutely. If the match had been reversed, that would absolutely have been. So, very quickly here, Deimos going down, but also Mikey Kimura going down.
Yeah, which is a pretty good trade for you guys. If we're just looking at the Deimos traded for Kikimura, that is definitely in your favor.
Yeah, that's a really good trade.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I would say I would think that we both had here was like, now we're both off the grid, we're relying on communication from our teammates to make sure that we know what was going on. And
Yeah, that didn't work on our end. I had extreme difficulty trying to get any information, so I'm calling out at this point, you know, what what is the Eris's HP, guys? Tell me
yeah.
your percentage. Is he? And I just wasn't getting anything. Which
Interestingly
is
enough, our Zealot pilot actually couldn't speak on Discord at this point. His Discord was like completely balked, and he had no vocals at all. He could hear what we were saying, but he couldn't talk. He had some huge microphone issues. So I was basically relying on my Eris, my Caracal, and my Rifter to tell me what was going on at this point.
well, at least you had that much. To be fair, so just to talk about like my team real quick, when this, so we weren't originally in the Invitational. I mean, it's totally understandable, but when a couple of teams dropped out, I saw on Twitter that Yin was looking for some additional teams to fill. My team was kind of down because of canceled tournaments this year, and was definitely interested in something to do. So I basically just started repeatedly pinging channel, super annoying. And the first people that spoke up got a spot. So there was no particular selection. These are a bunch of pilots who were perhaps new or perhaps haven't really flown with their team before in some cases. In particular, Fear and Xander were new. Yuki is in sort of a different role than he normally plays in AT, which is logistics. So this is kind of almost like a semi-new team for us, and we didn't necessarily have a chance to get down some of that communication that I would have liked to see with, you know, in going into AT. Yes, and interestingly enough, we actually have been running on Braves, and I did cancel it recently, but we have been running internal tournament games that were basically they're extensible from 4v4 up to 10v10, and we would just take whoever we could get and run matches with some pre-made comps that are rather similar to this, except they did have Logi, which is a huge factor in kind of the way these things go.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Having new people come in is always part of the team idea. Like, you want to bring in have this idea of what a tournament is. But equally, people who don't know what it is at all, and you want to like start bringing them through, they can maybe help you out in the next tournament. I've had experience last couple of years with FAT team, and we actually only had, I think, one tournaments player this time around for us, which was Arenthor, who was in this match. But equally, Radikos was new to our team, and we had a couple of people who hadn't flown in actual AT matches before as well, so it was kind of interesting to see how they worked out. My main objective here was really to make sure that everyone managed to get to at least one match.
Well, you guys did a good job, so.
Yeah. Our objective coming from the AT has always been to like improve on our last performance. So obviously we made it to the AT in 17, 18, 14, 13. Yeah, we made it through the feeder brackets in 14, and then I think we lost all our matches in the main AT, and then we got into the actual AT in 15 and won a match before we went out. So our objective has always been to like improve on our past performance, and
Yeah.
I think this really gave us a solid idea of what we could do as well with kind of it was really interesting to see.
Yeah, I actually kind of inherited the Brave tournament team last year. Mhm. Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, all good.
Sorry.
So on our end, the entire plan is to remove as much DPS from the field as quickly as possible, which is perhaps really basic, but that's kind of the way these things go. So the Eris being a relatively squishy target, especially once it does get wiped down, which you'll notice. The fact that we have tackle on the Caracal for some reason and not on the Eris at this point is a failing on our part. Um, not quite sure how that happened exactly. But if we can remove the Eris from the field, which when tackled, and I can't see at this point because I'm down, I can't see what's happening. If we can remove the Eris from the field, it's relatively low EHP. It can put out decent DPS. It helps to keep some of our smaller stuff alive. Because the Eris can actually be fit to do some reasonable damage.
I don't know if you noticed, Talia, but our
Mhm.
Eris is actually rail fit here.
I did kind of notice, just given the range. I figured, I mean, I actually went into this, I didn't look, which was a mistake, but I kind of assumed that, like, maybe it was blaster fit to help you push things over the edge, but given the distance it was keeping, I did realize it was rail fit.
Yeah, so the interesting thing for me here is actually the kind of split damage that you can see here. If you want to pause it right now, you can actually see that the Navy Brutix is taking some damage. The Pontifex is taking a lot, the Heretic's taking a little, and the Punisher is taking a little. And it's like, at this point, for me, I'm yelling, pretty much yelling, overriding some of the suggestions of my team members, and basically going, kill the Navy Brutix, kill the Navy Brutix. If we kill the Navy Brutix, we win. And I think that's a direct quote from what I was saying on the day, actually. But the split damage is quite interesting. As it turns out, the Pontifex is actually going to be a good call from whoever on my team was shooting it, but they weren't willing to own up at the time.
Understandable. And the Pontifex was a pretty good call.
Yeah, the Eris is really the squishiest target on our team here. Even though the Rifter's kind of heading in, the Eris is absolutely the target, and that'll go down pretty soon if I remember the way this fight went.
At this point, I was calling for shots in the Eris. I don't even at this point know who was shooting the Caracal, because I was not. That was not one of my requests.
Well, that's gonna be a thing from us later on as well. Match goes on. But we're kind of seeing the Pontifex hit structure here just about the same time as the Eris is hitting structure, and okay,
Caracal
well,
has great
wonderful.
damage.
Now I know who that was. Caracal does have great damage, but the Rifter is about to die. The Rifter just suddenly chunked and is gone now.
So I believe at this point, with the Eris about to die, we were actually having tracking issues from the Brutix Navy. Yuki finally spoke up. And we were having tracking issues from the Brutix Navy, which is why, because it was tackled, so it wasn't able to adjust to try to, you know, get transversal so that it could
It
track.
couldn't match transversal.
Thank you. That was what I was trying to say. He was having trouble matching transversal because he was tackled. So that was where I called out the Rifter. We removed the Rifter from the field quickly. I was happy with that. Unfortunately, he continued to have tracking issues through the rest of the match.
It's probably the at least for the next 2 seconds or so of match. It's probably the Eris that caused those issues because the Eris appears to have the Brutec pretty much hard tackled. Can't micro warp drive. Can't do anything. Oh yeah, the Eris was the last tackle thing at all. I believe the Zealot had a scram, if I remember rightly, but
it did, I do believe.
It didn't do amounts in terms of tackling in the early stages. No.
We've actually left that Zealot alone much too long, I think. So it was kind of tough just given the way things went because you've seen how my target
A Zealot
were
is
called
always
and why, but the Zealot it's so much damage and it's so tanky that
a
you
Zealot is
don't
always
want
a
to shoot
hard.
it.
It's always a hard primary because as you say, it is such a tanky ship that nobody ever wants to primary a Zealot straight out. You don't want to take it off the grid because you know how long it's going to take you. As you could tell, like the Navy Brutix that was hull tanked on our side, and Navy Brutix is fairly renowned for their hull tanking capabilities. That went down faster than a Deimos, which is kind of the meta-defining ship that this day one, and so you wouldn't want to try a Zealot instead of a Navy
No. And
anything
speaking of
else.
that Deimos, that was a fit that actually slipped by us. It was supposed to be, I do believe, dual wrap with an Ansil and just a regular wrapper on it. It turns out that we had just snagged an old AT fitting and never even touched it. Uh, we just thought it was okay and threw it in. If I had had like another week to practice in these camps, I probably would have spotted it and that would have gotten changed out, which may or may not have made things different.
I mean, I can see that, but I can also say from our side that the whole fitting thing was quite stressful. Day one fitting deadline, we spent about 7 hours between 3 or 4 of us figuring out our comps, and then we did another 5 on the day 2 fittings. So no, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not saying it was quite as stressful, but the whole deadline for submitting comps and making sure that every single ship has all of the right stuff, it's exactly the right fit, there's no last minute tweaks. I think one of my guys spent about 20 minutes going through and making sure that all of the cap boosters were correct for some reason. And
I think we were supposed to leave them out.
No, not the cat booster charges, the actual physical cat boosters, whether or not we wanted a Tech 2 or a Meta or whatever. And like, of all of the things that were a little bit, we weren't sure if they'd matter, cat boosters were, yeah. But it definitely came down to the wire in terms of the submission. That was for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, let's go. Let's see this Eris die.
So the Eris does finally go down at this point, which I was happy about. Given the matchup, we were actually at this point cheering for the Navy Brutix because it looked like he was repping stable. Unfortunately, the Ansel was just running out at this point.
Yeah, so this is definitely the point at which one of my members actually started calling for the Caracal to shoot at the heretic, and I was yelling over him going, no, kill the Brutix, focus on the Brutix, kill the fucking Brutix.
Which is absolutely the right call here, because once the Brutix goes down, we're basically fully neutered. The Heretic and the Punisher have no real meaningful DPS between the two of them, and that wins the match.
I mean, it wasn't even the DPS. It was that knowledge that if you managed to keep that Brutix tanking because we disappeared off to another target, we would lose based on the rules. That was all my thought was. It wasn't even a yes. It was a play within the rules.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I would have liked if you guys had gone and spent time on there.
Yeah, no kidding.
Oh yeah, that was match over. I was not incredibly happy at the time. I will admit to being a little bit salty, but it was a good game. I can't really look back on any decisions I made at this point and say for sure that that was the wrong one given the matchup. I do think there were multiple small piloting errors, especially things like me reloading my Ansel, that might have pushed things to go a little bit differently, but it's really hard to say because they finished the match with a fully an untouched Zealot, which is a huge chunk of DPS and it's a huge chunk of EHP. So if any of those small things would have been enough to actually change that, it's really hard to say.
Yeah,
At
I'd
the end,
absolutely agree.
at the end there, when we had the Navy Rudic still alive, it was trying to shoot the Caracal, but just not tracking. And he wasn't even webbed down at that point. I could tell that Yukiko was a bit frustrated trying to get hits, and they just weren't applying, which is a little bit weird. I'm not quite sure what was going on. We don't have a recording from Yuki's end to see why exactly that was happening. I know when you get the adrenaline going, it's entirely possible to have, not realize that you've chosen the wrong ammo for the situation or something along those lines, but uh, he did well enough. We tried. We definitely tried.
It was absolutely a match that had me on edge until the Brutix. Like that was really as I said, I was yelling at my guys. They will attest to that as well. It's a question of any little thing in this match could have switched it. If one of us had done something differently, we could have ended up seeing an entirely different result. And I had a huge amount of fun with this fight. It was great from my perspective. And
Oh yeah, I mean, while I was salty at the end, and I admit that, uh, we definitely did have quite a bit of fun too. Things were a bit quiet though because the high from our confidence after looking at the matchups to plummeting down to suddenly losing that kind of caught people off guard. Uh, and going into this tournament knowing that, just every team is hard, it's not like you're really going to get an easy matchup. Unlike AT, where you can kind of hope that you get some of those lower tier teams that you really have an easier game against to help you continue. Going into this tournament, there's no easier team to even hope for. It was kind of hurt our spirits because we didn't want to go home without a win, uh, and that was basically our goal at that point. We were really hoping to make it to day 2, of course, but oh, sorry, you can cut that or something.
yeah, I mean, really, as Katalya was saying, every team in this tournament is a hard match. For us to come up against Brave, obviously that's kind of a local derby, to use something of a colloquialism, but
Yeah.
it's like we're in Delve, they're in Catch. It's not that far for us, and we end up fighting on the regular anyway. So for us to go into this, it was kind of yeah, we really want to beat Brave, but we weren't sure it would happen. Brave are a really good AT team, and they've got a really good reputation. So for us to have beaten them was really good for our guys, just to like have that one win, and that win specific quite nice. I do want to say though, what Katalya was saying about adrenaline and the PvP shakes. It's very rare for a lot of older pilots to get PvP shakes regularly, and tournament play. If you're missing that rush of one-on-one fights or a few all fights that any little thing could make a difference, tournament play is absolutely where you get that. Right.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't tend to get it elsewhere. I go lose retributions fairly regularly, and I kind of don't feel anything at this point. But inside the match, if you have a recording of our end, my voice is. You can hear it kind of shaking. I'm yelling. I'm repeating things way too many times, just trying to get people to listen because I kind of know that they're dealing with that too. So it amplifies any communication problem that you might already have on a team because everybody's dealing with that rush, that it's much harder to get them to step back a tiny bit and actually communicate.
Honestly, I'd shout out to everyone on my team who helped make things happen this time around. They were really great guys to work with, really great guys to fly with, and I've flown with them a lot in past ATs, but I hope to fly with them in tournaments again in the future.
You know what? Shout out to you, Jen, for actually sticking with this and making it happen, even after all of the issues that we've had. We were very excited to actually be in it and super pumped that the tool is working. So, thank you for the opportunity.
Oh yeah, I'd like to echo that. Jin, you did a great job. So did the Streetlight guys, and so did whoever. I have no idea who it was at CCP, but somebody at CCP fixed the tool. And whoever you are a god amongst men. Thank you very much for letting us have the opportunity.
Seconded. Thank you, Mysterious Stranger.